Welcome to Hyde Talk. I'm Bob Felt, your host. Hyde Talk is an open and honest conversation about character, leadership, academics, athletics, and it's really about having real talk with real people. Our guest today is Director of Student Services at the Hyde School, Rebecca Cannon. Welcome, Rebecca, to Hyde Talk.
Thanks so much. Happy to be here.
So as we sort of jump right into it, Rebecca, I want to just ask you, maybe just share a little bit, you're the Director of Student Services at Hyde School. Just maybe explain to us and our listeners a little bit about your role and how you sort of came about that.
So Director of Student Services sort of oversees all of the services that are available to students, sort of in a non-academic sense. So students who might need to be connected with mental health services, or even we have the health center where we have 2 nurses available. The health center is open from 7:30 a.m. to 10 p.m. every day. So they might need to be seen for an injury, or they might have an illness, or so sort of managing everything that goes on with that. We also have someone who comes to campus every week to do a group on substance use, and so communicating with that person and other people who support our students. A lot of times there's also sort of the parent piece. Just today I talked to a parent who was calling and concerned about their child, a number of different things. One of them was sort of the mental health, and recognizing that our young people here are, primarily between the ages of 16 and 19 years old. Autonomy is huge, and emerging independence is really important. So telling them what they need to do can often lead to power struggles. So this dad was sort of strategizing. We were strategizing on how to approach ways to support his child. Some of it happens behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Sometimes I meet with teachers and say, I know a little bit of history on this student, and I would suggest maybe trying an approach that's more this way as opposed to that way.
Let me ask you, before we get into some of that, how did you get into this, and what's your background, and how did you get into working with kids and helping kids? How did that come about for you?
Well, I actually, way back in the 90s, I worked at a progressive preschool in Chicago for about 3 years. I was a teacher, preschool teacher, and had an amazing mentor, and learned a lot. And I thought, well, I want to go into teaching. So then I did a program in Chicago where I went into the Chicago Public Schools and did something called America Reads, where I was kind of I would pull students out of class and help them learn to read. And what inevitably started happening is they would share things about their lives, or just start talking about non-reading things. And I found myself really interested in kind of their stories and what they had going on in their lives. And I decided, I think that I really want to go into something where I can help young people. I grew up in a family with 7 children, and it was very, very busy. I think I started making my own breakfast, doing all my chores when I was 7 or 8 years old, and held my first, full-time summer job starting at age 9. So I didn't, and while my family's very loving, I didn't have a lot of help. So I thought I really would like to give back. And one day when I was in school, we had a school social worker come to our class, and the professor said, well, tell us about what you do. And the woman said, well, I have my schedule, and then I go to school, and then all these different things might happen, and the principal might pull me in, or I might have a kid at my door crying, or this or that. And it sounded very dynamic and interesting to me. Yeah. And so I switched and did my master's in social work there, did that in Chicago, did an internship at Evanston Township High School there, suburb of Chicago, 4,000 students there.
Wow.
And did that, and then they hired me on for their evening academy for my first year out of grad school, while I also had a full-time job at a K-4 elementary school.
Oh.
And then our kids were little. My husband's a teacher as well, and we moved back to Maine to be closer to my family And I got a job as a school social worker at Great Salt Bay School. I was there for 12 years. That was a K through 8 school. And then I moved on to work for Maine Health as a behavioral health clinician. That's what they call the LCSWs. And I worked at Madomic Valley High School, where we started up a school-based health center in a community that really had a lot of barriers to getting whether mental health counseling or just even regular care for sore throats or strep throat or things like that. So we started up a school-based health center at Madomic Valley High School, and I was there for 4 years before I came to Hyde. And what draws me to Hyde, or what drew me to Hyde, is really the mission of raising up young people in a way that involves them in their own lives. Between the discovery groups and the teachers and faculty and staff who are so committed to helping these young people learn, it's kind of, I've never been in a school before where it felt like there was so much happening outside of counseling sessions or conversations where I was trying to help families, that it feels like it's a place where we do everything together. And so that's what drew me here.
I didn't know all that about Chicago, so I'm glad I got a little timeline for you. But sort of working with teenagers, and not just teenagers, but teenagers' parents in these days. As someone who's been doing this a long time, and it's changed post-COVID and things, we'll talk a little bit about that, but what sort of unique challenges do you see students and parents facing today when it comes to their wellness, whether it's mental health, whether it's taking care of themselves physically, emotionally? What do you see as like just a few things that kids and parents are facing today?
I also have two kids. They're 18 and 20 years old now, freshman and junior in college. And, one of the things that I see parents facing nowadays is, things are just so different than they were when we were younger. And our children are facing a world where, even I know everybody talks about the social media and the cell phone. It's not just that. It's sort of that the anxiety and depression are kind of off the charts. And I think that there's the young people who seem to be doing the best are the ones who have passions and are highly involved in extracurriculars and take on their own things. The parents that I see doing...
When you say take on your own things, like...
So find a passion, whether it's painting or bike riding or something that is your own thing.
Owning something.
And the parents who do the best seem to be the ones who have their own thing going, and they have a community of their own that they can draw on. But going back to the parent I talked to today, while we were talking... They were talking about their child as a senior and navigating this, and I want this for them for going to college, and what if this happens and that happens? And I said, I just want to acknowledge that I can hear your anxiety about this next step where you're, I think the parent said, I've taken you as far as I could take you, and now it's on you. And that, I think that nowadays we're a lot closer to our kids. And I don't mean our parents didn't love us. I just mean we're involved in our kids' lives in ways that I think is a lot different.
Maybe sometimes too much?
I think that we walk the line.
Yeah.
And maybe sometimes too much, but it makes it so that when they go off, it's hard on the parents. And then even sometimes I think I hear young people say, I think my mom misses me more than I miss them. And I have to call her all the time. I've had kids say that this year, PG kids, like, I got to go check on my mom, And probably really the mom doesn't know that they are being perceived that way, right? I just love them. I want, So I think, and again, post-pandemic, I think COVID was huge. I think that kind of blew open this whole idea of mental health. One goal I have for Hyde is that everyone has mental health. We all have mental health. It's integrated into our lives, and it's not something that happens and that we deal with in a quiet room with one-on-one therapy. And the reason I say that is because it's very intimidating, even for full-blown adults, to sit in a room and get therapized.
Trust me.
And so I really think that there's so much that we can learn from one another by just acknowledging these
Well, let me
things in
like
life.
that
Yeah.
that just the word mental health, and I think there's a stigma involved with that. But I think of myself when I was a teenager. This is 1985, so a long time ago. My parents, shout out to my mom and dad, they basically required me to go see a therapist, okay, which I was not down with doing. So my parents would take me to the therapist's office. True story. I would walk in the front door, I would see my parents leave, and I would walk out. I wanted no part of sort of talking to somebody, even though I needed to at that time. I just didn't. There was just this stigma about it where, and I see it differently now, obviously, but how do you approach that with kids? Like, what's your approach with kids who like, oh, I don't want to go down to the, I know I need to talk to somebody, but I don't want to go down to the director of student services. How do you approach that with kids? What's your approach?
One thing that I really try to do is I really try to attend all of the things that I can, like faculty meetings and school meetings, and I try to just be around so that people are seeing me around,
Yeah.
and that I know what's going on in the school. And I also, I'm not going to get into power struggles. I'm never going, and I tell students that. I'll say, like, I'm not going to force you to talk about anything you don't want to talk about. Here's my goal. I'll tell you the basis. I don't always go into this. Some students want to know this, and I will. I'm happy to tell them. But, CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, used to be a huge thing, sort of thinking equals how you feel and this and that. Well, I'll just speak for myself that my thinking is all fine. Sometimes I need to get away from too much thinking, and I think a lot of kids struggle with that too.
Overthinkers.
Yeah, so there's something called ACT, which is acceptance commitment therapy, and it's kind of all about reflecting on behaviors, but also coming up with small actions that can make positive impacts on your life. So a lot of times, if I'm in a session with a student, and sometimes they'll be in a session and not quite realize it because I don't make it into this big thing. It's just a conversation. But
A
I'll
touch
say,
point, a connection.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I'll say, like, okay, tell me one action or sometimes two small actions that you can do today that's going to help you with where you want to get. And whatever the topic is, it could be like, I'm really stressed about college or a relationship or something like that. Sometimes it might be something you are doing only for yourself that, and I have to always say something healthy. So because action is really where it's at. And Hyde is all about action, really. And, we can get stuck in our heads. And so this is where I see is kind of more knowledge about that, about how powerful taking one small action, build on that, another action, more actions, can even just conversing with people, repairing things, getting things done, reaching your goals. That's where people get that feeling. In fact, I've had a parent talk before about their own child and say where they get choked up is when they are talking about their child demonstrating a competency. Yeah. Whether it's I saw them volunteering and they just want to give back, or whether it's playing, basketball or in some kind of athletic event. That's where parent is that competency, and that's where confidence really comes from.
And at Hyde, it's a small community. I always say this to families that come here, no guarantees, but the one thing I can guarantee, kids just won't be anonymous here. We just know the ins and outs of the kids, and they also know us as adults. How do you work, sort of your office, and how do you work actively with the teachers? So how does that work? I know we've started some new things this year. Maybe you can just explain how that works and how we bring the faculty in the loop to sort of keep all eyes on kids.
Yeah, I do a lot of listening. So anytime that we're in faculty meeting or other times, I'm really listening and learning on kind of who's maybe having a hard time and why. We've started something. Apparently there used to be something called the targeted student meeting.
Yep.
Right now, we're calling it an EMT meeting, enrollment management team meeting, because we're trying to just get more of a positive spin on it. We really want to see our students being successful here. That's what we all want. We share that goal, including the families, I really think. So every week we meet. It's probably, about 15 people who are in different positions. We come together. We might say, hey, who's on the list? Who are we kind of worrying about? And what we do in that meeting is we create small teams for each student. So it might be discovery group leaders, a dorm parent. It could just be somebody who has a connection with the family. Yeah. But we want to have it be a smart team of people who really know the child and are able to know the student.
And the meetings aren't per se like, hey, it's a code red about Bob.
No.
It's just...
I think the idea is that when we meet frequently, we can keep anything that might be bubbling, we're going to try to address it and keep it small, as opposed to ignoring things or missing things. Yep. And then having a bigger problem down the road. So yep. That's a big thing that we've started this year. And I definitely encourage, teachers, parents, students to talk to me anytime, come by anytime. I'll never turn a student away. Yeah. If they come and say,
and how about like, how many years have you been, what is the time frame you've been with us at Hyde now?
11 months.
11 months. Okay. We're almost on a year. Mm-hmm. We're going to do another podcast, celebrate your year anniversary. But what, if you sort of see the future for, kids and families and sort of your department and the things that you're doing, what are some initiatives and things that, I really would like to get this going?
I'd really like for us as a community to just normalize more that we all get stuck sometimes, and that maybe we could, as a community, come up with some forums where we're just sharing ideas of what we do to get through, of how we get unstuck. And there's different levels of stuck, right? There's, I'm having a bad day. There's, I seem to be having a bad month, and there's, wow, I think there might be something clinical going on here, and I need some professional support. But right now, I think it's a very busy schedule, yep. And there's a lot of, like every school, there's a lot of competing things happening here, but I would love to have that be more of an organic part, like, I don't know, community meeting, whether it's sort of every month we have a topic and we say, hey, we're sharing about mental health, and we could call it something different if people don't like mental health and there's a stigma, but it's basically just tools for living life, right? Having relationships, yeah. And being successful in those ways.
And how would you, as families, and some of our viewers are current families, alumni families, people just find us on the World Wide Web or on social media platforms. How would you, if a family was considering boarding school or checking it out, and, I think parents, I know I was just sort of letting our kids going someplace outside. What advice would you give parents and students on going to boarding
Hyde
school?
No, or boarding school?
Boarding school, Hyde, just leaving home. How would you, what advice if a family came to you and say, hey, I'm struggling with this, thinking about having my kid go away to school? How would you?
I think just encouraging the young person to find trusted people. I do think starting with the adults, and people who they can rely on. Not that they're going to go and spill their heart out every time, but sometimes you just need someone to tell you where to go for this. Or, yeah. So I think really kind of listening is always going to work. So if your child's struggling, just listen, and and sometimes it's sort of like, I'm sorry this is happening, and I love you so much. But also just sort of saying, what is an action you can take? Who do you think might be able to help you with this? Is there a teacher there? Getting connected to the campus. Yeah. And so that you start to feel that it's your place, because belonging is huge. And a lot of times that's what's kind of underneath that feeling of not feeling okay, is that you don't feel like you belong yet.
Last question, because I know parents, So if you're meeting with students here on campus and I know parents call you, and say, hey, how has it been going with Bobby? I mean, I know my mother would have been calling you nonstop. How's it going? How do you handle that with a parent who's like, hey, tell me, give me a vibe on what's going on? How do you sort of handle that with parents?
I say, listen, I'm not going to share specifics of our conversation, but I've heard, sometimes I'll say things like what is going on in the community. Like, wow, I noticed that they're part of this, or wow, I heard a compliment about them the other day, or this or that. And I'll tell you, parents nowadays, they know. They'll say, oh, no, I know, I don't want to. But a lot of times, the parents need me to listen. I need to listen to the parents so that I know.
So it's a two-way street.
Right.
Yep.
So a lot of times I'm trying to learn, too, about the parents. And I will always also encourage both the young person and the parent, hey, why don't you talk to your mom about that? Or why don't you have you talked to your dad about that? Have you mentioned that? Or I really encourage you to talk to today I had a parent bring up the college stuff. Have you talked to Lisa Gellert? She does an amazing job with our college prep program, and I highly encourage you, like that. So directing them to the resources that can really help.
That's huge.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. Well, Rebecca, thank you for being here today. This was a great topic for us to cover, not just about Hyde, but mental health, and just having touch points with people, I think is just incredibly important now with everything that's going on in the world. So thank you for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
And, I'd like to thank our listeners and viewers, and, just remember to tune in to all your favorite social media platforms and podcast channels, and we'll see you next time.